The State of Oklahoma versus Daniel K. Holtzclaw, case number CF 2014-5869. Verdict, count 1, sexual battery. We, the jury, impaneled and sworn in the above entitled cause, do upon our oaths find as follows. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery and set punishment at 8 years. Count 2, procuring lewd exhibition. Not guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition. Count 3, burglary in the first degree. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of burglary in the first degree, nor lesser included. Count 4, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition, and punishment is set at 5 years. Count 5, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition, and punishment is set at 5 years. Count 6, defendant is not guilty of the crime of stalking. Count 7, defendant is not guilty of the crime of sexual battery. Count 8, defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy, and punishment is set at 20 years. Count 9, rape in the first degree. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree. Count 10, forcible oral sodomy. Defendant is guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy, and punishment is set at 16 years. Count 11, rape in the first degree. Defendant is guilty of the crime of rape in the first degree, and punishment is set at 30 years. Count 12, forcible oral sodomy. Defendant is not guilty of the crime of forcible oral sodomy. Count 13, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery, and punishment is set at 8 years. Count 14, sexual battery. Defendant is guilty of the crime of sexual battery, and punishment is set at 8 years.
And this goes on for 6 minutes. Him just bawling his eyes out after listening to, count after count after count. I was shocked at how many counts there are. It kept on going on and on. They are going to try and run this consecutively, meaning he's going to be spending over 200 years in prison for doing these horrific acts. This guy raped countless black women over the course of who knows how long. But he exploited his position of power so that he could intimidate these women into doing all kinds of sick sexual acts against their will, and he thought he could get away with it. It's times like this when I see scumbags bawling their eyes out, and I wonder to myself, how could it have come to this? Like, how can someone like that even feel an ounce of pity for themselves? Knowing what he did. He knows what he did. The evidence is overwhelming, so we know he did it. And he knows what he did. So, in his mind, why is he sad? Why is he surprised? Like you saw in the beginning of the video, he wasn't shocked. He was on the edge of his seat. But he knew, there was a bajillion counts. So, if in order for him to get away with this bullshit, he would have to be found not guilty for every fucking thing. At some point you would think that, okay, well, I know I did this stuff, so I'm probably gonna get bumped off for at least one of those fucking things. And some of those, had huge penalties. 20 years in prison was one of the ones near the end, it's unbelievable. So in his warped brain, I wonder to myself, how can you even, be on the edge of your seat thinking you might get away with it? And then, how can you feel so much, sadness after you hear that you're guilty of what you know you did? My guess is that, it's kind of the mindset of a rapist. the rapists, if you look at the pathology of a rapist, what's going on in their head and what kind of person they are, it's been determined that they are otherwise normal human beings without any kind of unusual or extraordinary circumstances about them. There are only one or two characteristics about them. They have low empathy. They don't really, they can't relate to other people. Especially, they can't relate to their victims. They can't put themselves in their victim's point of view. They can't put themselves in their victim's shoes. They can't think, if this happened to me, how would I feel about it? So that might be why he feels so much pity for himself. Because in his warped brain, he's only thinking about himself. He's like a fucking narcissist. He's an egomaniac. He doesn't give a fuck about anyone else. It's all about him and what's happening to him. And I gotta tell you, watching that video, I don't feel an ounce of remorse. It's just pathetic watching that piece of shit bawl his eyes out. I don't have to feel bad about what's happening to him at all. He brought this on himself. He has no one to blame except himself. And so that's the problem with these narcissists and egomaniacs, these arrogant fucks. They only think about themselves. They never once thought about their victims or what they were doing to their victims. How do you think their victims felt after he raped them? After he orally... this is how they described it. Oral sodomy. Let me translate that for you. Face fucking. He faced fucked these girls. These black women. How do you think they felt when he violated them so violently? Did he feel an ounce, even like one 100th of the remorse he's feeling for himself? Absolutely not. And that's why he's a piece of fucking shit. When you see a video like this, pathetic. It just shows, it reminds me of the end of Shawshank Redemption, when you see the guy who was the guy who was in Starship Troopers, the security guard. He was acting like a tough guy the entire movie. He was big, he was intimidating, but at the very end, once he is being held accountable for his crimes, he starts bawling his eyes out like a little girl. Like a little girl. Because deep down, that's what he is. That's what all these fucking pussies are that commit these crimes and thinks they can get away with it. They are cowards. They hide behind their veil of security, him being a police officer. And that kind of reminds me of some of the internet trolls. They hide behind their keyboards and their computer screens. But in real life, they're fucking cowards and pussies. Little bitches. And this guy's a little fucking bitch. You don't have to think for a second. Don't feel an ounce of remorse for him. It's pathetic. He's pathetic. And he got what he deserved for raping all those women. This is Enigma Hood signing off.